Hello, everybody. Welcome to the fourth meeting of the Corporate Services Committee. I will call the meeting to order by saying that this is a virtual meeting during the COVID-19 emergency. And please check the city website for current details of COVID-19 service impacts. Meetings can be viewed via live streaming on YouTube and the city website. I will also say that the City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing or advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. To make a request specific to this meeting, please contact csc@london.ca. And now I will look to committee to see if there are any disclosures of pecuniary interest. I see none. So we'll go to the consent items. There are 10 of those, and I wonder if anybody would like to pull any of the consent items. Deputy Mayor Morgan?
Yes, I'd like to deal with 2.6 and 2.9 separately if we can.
2.6, 2.9, anything else? Councillor Van Holst.
Perhaps, Madam Chair, 2.2 and 2.3.
Okay. So I have 2.2, 2.3, 2.6, and 2.9 pulled. I'll check one more time to see if there's anything else. Okay, so I'll need a motion to move the consent items 2.1, 2.4, 2.5, 2.7, 2.8, and 2.10. Do I have a motion? Councillor Pelosa, seconded by Councillor Kayabaga. Any comments on those consent items? Councillor Van Holst. You're muted, Councillor.
Thank you. My comment on 2.1 is that it seems we're taking out less funds as debentures than in the last 5 years. So that seems to be a positive thing. Maybe I could just have a staff comment on that through you.
Okay, I believe Ms. Barbone or Mr. Collins, who would like to comment on that?
Through the chair, it's Ms. Bourbon. I'm happy to answer that question. So based on the debentures that are authorized, we always go out to market based on when we have actually incurred the expenditures. So it's a combination of the timing and not having as many expenditures to go out that are completed for the debt that's been authorized at this point. But the councillor is correct. This is a little lower, and there's a number of factors that are impacting it, but primarily with respect to just the spending and the timing that we're going out.
Councillor?
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Okay, seeing none, we have a motion on the floor. It's been moved and seconded, so I'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 6-0.
Thank you. I'll go to item single source procurement for infrastructure managed services and core upgrade for emergency communication systems. And that was Councillor Van Holst that pulled that one. I'll go to you, Councillor. And you need to unmute yourself, Councillor.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I've got two questions through you to staff. First is perhaps I'd like to ask for a definition of infrastructure managed services, and also why we chose a 7-1-1-1 in terms of years for the contract and the options, as opposed to something different like a 5-5. So those are my questions.
I'm not sure if that's you, Mr. O'Brien, or or somebody else.
Thank you. Through the chair for the question. So with respect to the first question, it's really a fancy term that talks about a maintenance contract for our emergency radio communication system. So this is a contract that will work with the vendor and ourselves to ensure that this system is up and operational. 99.999% of the time is the target that we shirk towards. And this contract is put in place to ensure that we have access both to the expertise and the equipment from the vendor to ensure the system is up and operating. The second question with regard to, if you could just repeat that so I got it correctly.
Oh, why we went with 7 years and then 3 one-year options for renewal?
Yep, so the total time frame of 10 years actually came from our review that we did with an external vendor. The report came to council a couple of years ago now, where they are recommending, based on best industry practice, to move towards a longer term contract with vendors in this type of situation. And with regard to the actual 7 plus the individual 3s, that was based on the discussions with the vendor on what we believe will start to take place towards the end of the contract. And rather than enter into anything beyond the 7-year point, where there may be substantial changes in the industry, we felt it would be best to go with 3 individual years at that point.
Okay, thank you. And Madam Chair, if I may, another question, just for some clarification. So in this situation, do we get a consultant to tell us the best path forward, and then they recommended their own services? Is it?
So we had a consultant come in a few years ago to review the program in its entirety, external to any of the city or our vendor. This was a process that we did through tender, where we brought an external consultant to come in and provide recommendations on moving this program forward. And that report came to council, as I said, and we've utilized that.
Okay.
We've utilized that report moving forward to provide our pathway in working with the vendor.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. And then perhaps finally, Madam Chair, just could staff provide us the justification for going to a single source and not taking this out to tender? I'm just noting that there's been some questions about procurement coming up lately, and so I think I'd like to have that question answered.
Thank you. Through the chair. So as identified in the report, this particular system is a proprietary system, and this vendor has the knowledge, expertise, and the equipment that is necessary to run this program. So this vendor has that particular expertise, knowledge, and equipment that is not available to others, and therefore they are the chosen path to move this program forward on a proprietary basis.
Okay, and that difference, through you, Madam Chair, is certainly can't be radio, because every provider would use the same, essentially the same radio frequency. So that's nothing new about the technology. What is it about this that's so proprietary?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Through the chair. So it's not the actual frequencies, as you noted. Radio frequencies are common amongst many different passive communication, but it's the actual technology that moves the information through those frequencies that is proprietary.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thanks, Councillor. Any other questions or comments on this item? Can I have a mover? Seconded by Councillor Pelosa. And I'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, thank you. that takes us to 2.3, the on Budweiser Gardens, and that was also you, I believe, Councillor Van Holst.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And through you, have perhaps a couple questions, maybe some comments too. It seems that after a year of COVID, we're now seeing some really hard data on the effects of this. In this case, the job losses, the reduction in payment, etc. Here, I wanted to ask through you to staff, does it look like there's going to be a tax implication on these, the loss of income that we're going to experience over the next few years because the profits are going to go to pay for the losses of the operator, and they won't be coming to the City of London?
I'll go to Ms. Barbone for that.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair. So, no, this is certainly the way this process works is that the City of London has as part of its revenue an amount that comes in annually. Over the past 18 years, the average allocation of the City of London is about 296,000, so just shy of 300,000. It does go up and down. The city does have a commitment of a guaranteed $50,000 annually that is part of the budget. So certainly, because the amounts are fairly small, we do not anticipate that there would be a budget pressure upcoming from this. We have typically what we do is as this money comes in, we put it into the reserve fund to help pay down the debt. So we do have enough in that reserve fund to, it'll be tight, but we anticipate there'll be enough to pay down the debt as planned, that there's approximately just over $2 million that is outstanding, and that will be completed in 2023. So that is through the agreement that the City of London created many years ago when this was initially created. All of the profits do come through, but certainly we know that those aren't guaranteed. So we've budgeted accordingly and have been conservative with those amounts to ensure that there is no tax impacts if that doesn't materialize.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And that's of course encouraging too, because now after 2023, we're going to see there's going to be a positive impact on our budget because we won't be making those debt payments. And those are, is it about $1 million a year or 600,000? Perhaps my memory could be refreshed there.
Ms. Barbone?
Sorry, through the chair, I don't have that exact amount that we pay every single annually in front of me. We might be able to look that up if you give us a few moments, but I can provide that at council if the councillor wishes to have that allocation.
Okay, Madam Chair, I'd be interested in the number, but our treasurer could just send me that by email, and that would satisfy my interest, I'm sure. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor. Any other comments on this item or questions? Councillor
I'm happy to move this. I'm happy to move that.
Wonderful. Thanks, Councillor. Do I have a second? Is that you, Mr. Mayor? Thanks. I saw your finger. And Councillor Pelosi has a question. Sorry, Councillor. The mayor got in just ahead of you, pushing up his glasses, but I took it as a second.
Happy to let Councillor Pelosi have that honor, but either way.
Wonderful. And I see no other debate on this item, so we have it moved and seconded, so I will call the question.
Closing the vote and the motion passes 6-0.
Easy for you to say, Madam Clerk. Item 2.6, the 2021 tax policy expectations, and the Deputy Mayor pulled that one. So go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I wanted to just ask a couple of questions and make a few comments on this one, but I'll start first by identifying a couple of components of the report. First, this is the first time that we get to see the flow through from the work that London did, and I know the mayor and the previous deputy mayor, Councillor Helmer, worked on it with myself on the business education tax issue. And now you see what the results will actually be on the ground for our businesses and for those that applied for a construction permit before March 22nd, 2007, they would expect about an 8.279% decrease in their taxes all in, including education rates. And for building permits after March 22nd, 2007, the decrease would be about 0.689% because they were already paying a lower rate anyways. The other thing this report identifies is because MPAC has frozen the assessments, that's going to have two impacts as I understand it. The first is that there won't be shifts between the tax ratios based on MPAC adjustments. So whereas before we would see a report that would say, here are the shifts and commercial is appreciating faster than residential. And so the commercial is taking on a larger share of the budget increase. In this case, because of the freeze, all of those tax classes, unless we adjust the ratios, which is a forthcoming report, will see the same increase across the board. And also because of that, and because of the pause in MPAC assessments, we won't receive a benefit from shifts in the education tax across the province, away from cities like London and into other cities that are appreciating at faster rates, because essentially no one's appreciating. I just want to confirm that my understanding of this is correct with the treasurer, and then I have a couple of questions stemming from it.
Ms. Barbone.
Thank you. Through the chair, I can confirm that that is correct.
So my first question is, and I know that this report is titled Tax Policy Expectations. Do we have any sense, or if not today, at what point will we have a sense on what is going to happen when the MPAC freeze is lifted? Is there any sense on how that is going to be handled? And is there simply just going to be a catch-up by significant shifts between the tax classes later? Or is there some sort of phase-in? What I'm unclear on is, how is this going to play out in the future when the one-year freeze of assessments is over?
Ms. Barbone?
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you. That's okay. I was waiting. Thank you. Through the chair, I'll start, and then perhaps Mr. Logan may wish to add some additional commentary. So at this point, we still do not have definitive understanding on what impacts are going to be as a result of the reassessment. We don't have definitive confirmation yet of exactly what that base year is going to be yet. So there is talk that it could potentially be still 2019. They could change it to a different valuation year, but certainly whatever year that they do, when that reassessment occurs, you could see the changes across the properties. Typically, there is a phase-in period where those changes across the property classes are phased in over the 4 years. Whether that's going to be different or not, we still don't know. So that is where next year will absolutely be, certainly if we receive any more information when we come forward in April, we will bring that forward to council at that time. But lots of unknowns at this point. So certainly from our perspective, we're recommending that, when we bring the report forward in April, we'll want to be cognizant of those many unknowns in terms of what changes council may possibly wish to make with tax ratios at that time. I would just look to see if Mr. Logan has anything else that he wishes to add that I might not have included.
Mr. Logan?
I would simply agree with what was said. I think it's unknown at this point in time.
Thank you for your answer. I will say the unknown in this case concerns me because it's an unknown, and obviously it's also something that we have very little control over, the way that MPAC valuations change over time and the way that that can cause shifts in our tax ratios. And as we discuss tax policy this year, I think we'll be fairly restricted in what we may want to do, because we may want to leave capacity in future years to try to offset any sort of dramatic changes. But I do appreciate that there are a lot of unknowns at this point, and as we get more information, that information, we'll be able to develop a strategy that hopefully makes sense. The final thing I wanted to comment in this report is the creation of the small business property tax subclass. And I appreciate the information that's been provided and simply the lack of details that we have before us. I certainly don't think it is something that we need to contemplate at this time for two reasons. One, we don't know exactly how it will work. And two, we would actually have to have a serious discussion about whether or not we want to invoke that subclass. All that subclass will do is shift the tax burden onto other classes. There's no magic tax break in this scenario. So we need to keep cognizant of that. It's very clearly articulated in the report, which I appreciate. And there's no magic solution by creating a new tax class. It would allow us some options to provide relief if we could properly define what a small business is, but that relief would come at the expense of every other tax class. So I would exercise a sense of caution as we investigate this into the future, but again, know that we simply don't have the details yet on this piece, and as those details come out, perhaps that scenario shifts in some way where there's some sort of significant benefit to London businesses, at which time I'd be very happy to investigate and pursue it. But I know this report is for receipt, but I just wanted to draw attention to some of these key things in it, as it will shape some of our discussions on tax policy moving forward.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And my interest in this report too was also the new optional small business properties subclass. Of course, the small businesses have been impacted very heavily by COVID. And this seems like it would have very strong moral arguments for it. However, the practical arguments against seem to be very significant. We'd have to create a whole new bureaucracy to deal with this new subclass. And I have my question through you to our staff is, would something like this also be dealt with an approach such as a CIP for small businesses, say?
Ms. Barbone.
Thank you through the chair. So certainly you could do a CIP. There are obviously many rules governing a CIP that would not necessarily have the same impact that this subclass could do. They're very different tools, but certainly if you were to set something up, that is an avenue. I think the challenge with this specifically is that, it's all in the definition, and how you define what that definition really depends on what it is you're actually trying to achieve in setting that out. And I think the challenge is that small businesses are very, very unique and have very different characteristics. So where you might include one, you may disadvantage another, and alternatively, the same could be true. So the CIP, again, is a different kind of tool. It does not, based on the legislative framework, doesn't actually, it depends what you're trying to achieve. If you're trying to result in lower taxes, there are challenges with using a CIP to target that specifically for small businesses, which is one of the reasons why they are trying to create this. They have successfully utilized this in some other municipalities. I think Kingston does this for something very, very specific that their council approved, but again, a very specific and very narrow focus related to this. So we will bring forward information as we see this come forward and advise council what the alternatives and options are that you can consider.
Councillor?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I appreciate the answer, and I won't ask for any more details about what would be required to do this, because I think it's quite extensive. And of course, the definition is a challenge. Small business, the definition of a small business changes by sector as well, so it would be a challenge. However, it's probably something worth hearing a report on how other communities deal with it at some future date when more has been done on this. But I hope that we're not going to pioneer something here. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Kayabaga.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, I just wanted to ask a question. First, I do share the same concerns that Deputy Mayor Morgan was sharing. I did read that it will impact our tax ratio, and not knowing how that's going to look like, it's kind of concerning. I also do want to comment on the savings that are going to be happening on the commercial industrial businesses. Is a great it's great to read this. And my other question I had or concern was for the small business subclass considerations. I just wanted to know what process staff are going to take to have it informed. Like what's going to be, who's going to be involved in this conversation and making this policy, what kind of consultations they plan on undertaking.
Ms. Barbone?
Thank you, through the chair. So that's a really good question. Without the regulations and knowing specifically how it's going to work, it's really challenging to be able to answer that question because we don't know what it will allow us to do, and the devil will be in the details. So once we receive that regulation, I'm assuming it will happen later on this year, and that we would be able to bring a report forward at that time, and then also provide our strategy. Certainly, I think the first question will be whether council even wants us to pursue this, noting that it will have obviously it would go down for a small business class, but it would raise the other classes as a result of that. So the first question would be whether council wants us to even entertain pursuing this. And if so, then we would bring forward a plan of how we would try to engage the business community, possibly the Chamber of Commerce, and a number of other areas to try to look at how we might come up with a definition and what that would mean with trying to even implement once a definition was even identified. So unfortunately, I don't have the details because we need to see what the province is going to bring forward, but we would definitely report back and ensure that we have council's recommendation to go forward in that respect.
Councillor?
And there's, oh, sorry, thank you, Madam Chair. Through you again. And sorry, I think I missed the timeline that the province is going to be releasing the regulations. I'm not sure if Mrs. Barbone had mentioned it or not.
Go ahead, Ms. Barbone.
Thank you, through the chair. No, we do not know when the province is going to release the regulation. We actually thought by now we would have seen one. We know that they are actively working on it and anticipate sending it forward in short order, but what exactly that timeline is, I do not know. And as soon as we receive it, we will pull together a report and bring that forward through committee to advise you when that is received.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great, thank you. Any other comments or questions on this item? I have a comment and a question for Ms. Barbone. First of all, I just want to say, again, thanks to the provincial government for making those adjustments to the business education tax rates. I know I had a large employer in Ward 5 who's been advocating for this for years because they own property across the country, and especially in Toronto. And so they were able to see very, very clearly the inequity of that business education tax rate across the province. And London had quite like they were paying more here than they are in Toronto for their large properties. So this will mean a great deal for them, and I've already communicated to them weeks ago, in fact, that this was coming. So they're quite pleased, as I'm sure other payers of the business education tax rates will be. And thanks to the mayor for continuing to work hard on this, as well as city staff, because I know this took a full court press at all levels. But again, at the end of the day, thanks to the provincial government for listening to us and making sure this comes through. This is going to be a really, really big part of the COVID relief for our local businesses here. I do have a question for Ms. Barbone on this, and I know we did have a conversation about this, but I think it's important that that our businesses, our local businesses, understand when they can expect this to actually come through in actual dollars and cents for them. So the tax policy and this education tax reduction, when will they be able to realize this for real here in London?
Thank you through the chair. So this policy change made by the provincial government is effective for the 2021 year. So our tax bills have gone out for the interim installments, and subject to the April tax policy report that council will approve, the final billings will then go out shortly after, and all of these changes will be reflected within the bills that go out in our final billing and will be realized, in fact, this year by all the businesses.
And that's terrific news. Thank you very much, Ms. Barbone. Mr. Mayor. You have your mute on there, Mr. Mayor.
Didn't realize. Thank you, Chair. A lot of acknowledgements have been given out today. But I'd like to give a particular shout out to the Premier and also to Minister Jeff Yurek on the business education tax. And here's why. When I had direct conversations with the Premier about this, his comment to me was that it had not been presented to him before. And but he was intrigued by the idea. I can tell you that Minister Yurek, who understands small business well, was captured by the idea as well and became a strong advocate. And that matters when cabinet has to make decisions, and of course through finance as well. And then treasurer of the day, finance minister, was seized with it as well. But it really does take a lot of effort, and certainly our own staff have been acknowledged, and we appreciate what they have done, and colleagues in this meeting and around the horseshoe have been great in terms of support. I mean, it's great news, I think, for all of Ontario. And you referenced one particular vocal resident of yours in your ward, Chair, and because it had a dramatic impact on them. So, I mean, all to say great news, but I think, sometimes politicals don't get their due. And I think this is one where the Premier and Minister Yurek should get a shout out, because we appreciate their support in making this work. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well said. Any other comments or questions on this? I need a mover on this. Moved by the mayor and seconded by the deputy mayor. If there are no further comments or questions, I'll call the question.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, and that brings us to 2.9, the review of ward boundaries, and that is also the deputy mayor that pulled that, so I'll go to him.
Okay, my apologies, colleagues. I'm going to talk about this one for a little bit, and then I have a motion that I'd like to attempt to move on it. For those who were not on the previous council, this was an issue that came up during the last council about making redistribution to the ward sizes. We came up with some minor adjustments, which you can see in the report, which tried to rebalance some of the wards. You can see that those adjustments didn't last very long in most cases, as the shifts over the last 2 years in population growth negated them. And I will say I voted against the previous changes because I didn't think they went far enough to rebalancing the wards and creating a system that has, a relative fairness throughout it. And so what does that mean? Well, in the report, it references the principle of, let me see here, of effective representation. And although there are no specific rules at the municipal level on effective representation, as the report says, it's common law in Canada that we try to achieve that principle. Well, one of the key components of that principle is the relative parity of voting power. So the relative parity of voting power. So this isn't about the size of wards, it's about the differences between the wards. So the first condition of effective representation resides in that relative equality, meaning the weight of one elector's vote is not significantly out of proportion in relation to the weight of another elector's vote. So let me show you an example of a vote being out of proportion, and I'll pick on myself as well as Councillor Hillier. So I represent the largest ward, which means there are 37,000 voices that I represent when I cast my vote. And in Councillor Hillier's ward, there are 25,000 voices that are represented when he casts his vote. And that is a significant difference. To put it in percentage context, Ward 7 is 144% larger than Ward 14, which means there is a misalignment in the terms of the relative parity of voting power on behalf of the constituents. So I got 37,000 people trying to convince me to vote one way or another, which is great. I get lots of contact with folks, and others do not. And that is not like a workload issue. That is a democratic issue. Mm-hmm. So I'm saying I don't really care what the size of the wards are. Quite frankly, if you're properly supported and compensated, that is basically a non-issue. But it is the relative size of the wards that matter. And I am still of the opinion that this is not only out of alignment, but it is the wards that are the largest that are also growing the fastest. And so there are wards that will continue to exacerbate this problem over time if we don't correct it. So I know that the report suggests that there is no need for a boundary review because we're still under the 25% threshold, which is a number that has been used by other levels of government, but there's no specific requirement in the Municipal Act for us to meet a threshold one way or the other to redistribute it. It is solely up to us. There are other mechanisms that can trigger this. The province can do it. The residents can petition the province or the courts to do it, or we can do it. And we have made adjustments, minor adjustments in the past, but I think we need to make adjustments here before the next election. Otherwise, it will continue to stray out of balance. And I'll tell you, Ward 7 will likely exceed, potentially, the 25% threshold during the next term of council if the pace continues at the way it is, and there's certainly lots of development. I would say Wards 9, 10, 12 are also fairly large. Ward 4 is also up there too. Ward's 5, yes, Ward 5, sorry. The chair's like, you're number 2 actually, so sorry. So that's my bad notes. So yeah, Ward 5, the chair is the second largest ward, but it doesn't really matter who's representing these wards. The principle is a democratic one at heart. And this is I'm sorry I went to school for political science, but now you're getting that end of it. So I'd like to suggest that we make some changes here. And I prepared a motion that I would like to put on the floor. And that motion reads as follows, and I can have the clerk circulate it to colleagues so they can read it. That the following actions be taken with respect to the ward boundaries review. A, the report dated March 1st, 2021, entitled Review of Ward Boundaries be received. B, and I'll talk about this one in a second, civic administration be directed to report back on a governance model that contemplates 10 wards to provide the opportunity for municipal council to evaluate this model against the current 14 ward system. And C, civic administration be directed to report back on potential changes to the existing 14 ward system that would result in a more balanced population between the wards. It being noted that the reviews outlined in B and C above would be undertaken based on the already set guidelines in Council Policy 535 called the Review of Ward Boundaries. In other words, I'm not suggesting we do anything outside of our policies in assessing the wards, but I do think that we should both assess the 14 ward system, and as has been discussed in the past, people have contemplated, should we have a 10 ward system? I have no problem looking into that as one of the options, but the decision on that would come down the road. I've separated those in case people have a significant problem with that. They can certainly vote against it, but I thought I would include all the options because this is the point at which we can consider such things in the ward boundary review. So I apologize, Chair, for the length of my comments. I have that motion that I would like to put on the floor, and I would see if there's a seconder and pass it back to you.
Okay, so I saw the mayor's hand go up first. Does that mean you're seconding it, Mr. Mayor?
It does, and at the appropriate time, I'd love to make a comment as well.
This is perfect.
Thanks very much. I appreciate the Deputy Mayor's comments with regard to both the issues of parity or greater parity at least, although not a precise science, is certainly as close as one can get. And the other of exploring the options with respect to council size. I don't think any of us on council should be concerned about looking at what the implications of that might be. We may ultimately decide that doesn't work, but again, we'll get public opinion. We'll get a broader perspective on what might make sense. I'm particularly when I look at our population, by the way, and for the record, as much as the signs on the highway, most of them say 383,000. Did it not interest you to know, Chair, that the current population shows 427,185, most of them, I think, in Ward 5. But all to say, notwithstanding the Deputy Mayor's comments, but all to say, I don't think we should be uncomfortable looking at at all options that are in the best interests of the citizens of London. So I would encourage us to support the direction of the Deputy Mayor to allow the clerk to have an exploratory on some of this and provide some information so we really know what it is we're discussing. And I appreciate the way that it's been approached so that we can have more time, not only to consider it personally as members of council, but also as we seek public opinion on this as well. So thank you, Deputy Mayor. And I'm certainly interested in other comments, but I'm pleased to second this motion.
So Councillor Van Holst, I saw your hand. Did you want to comment on that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will make a comment. Just a brief one. I'm delighted that to support the motion. I think the Deputy Mayor has put together something that will address a number of issues and give us some good information about options for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Pelosa.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A question for you to staff, recognizing that any ward boundary potential changes would need to be in place before election 2022. Wondering what deadlines we are working with that would give time for council to make a decision that could still be implemented.
Okay, so I'm going to go to Ms. Raycroft for that.
Through the chair, Ms. Raycroft here. Any decision, including any appeals to LPAT, would have to be completed by January 1st, 2022.
How's that, Councillor Pelosa?
Yeah, I appreciate that. My other thoughts on this is seeing that Ward 12 was 7th in 2018 for population. We've now moved up to spot number 3 for 2020 with no signs of slowing as we have some major infill going on with the ward. My other side of the concern with this is recognizing when there's such population diversity in numbers as we're trying to do ward-wide mail outs and engagement with constituents. It's just a little bit harder if you have a spread out population, and also more expensive if you're trying to get to that many more homes, acknowledging that. And on the point of discussing redrawing ward boundaries, I did take on some of Ward 9 into the 2018 election and have been serving those constituents and dealing with new people coming over who've gone through a transition. I also think it's important to note that as we look at the ward boundaries, realizing that there's a urban rural divide. Some councillors don't have that, but certainly those are on the periphery of the city. Thinking about the South End in particular, our issues are just so much different. And I think the more councillors that could have an opportunity to have to hear those issues and deal with misconstituents is important. And I know the downtown area and the core area have different issues, but some of us face a lot of different issues when we're trying to do voter engagement, and it can be difficult. So I appreciate this conversation today as we look at how many calls and residents we're even servicing as we're trying to balance those other needs in our council work. So generally supportive. It was just the other concern of if we're not going to change ward boundaries or down to a smaller amount of wards, of still trying to find a way to make it that we can still engage with our residents if we even wanted to do all those ward-wide mailouts, recognizing some people are trying to get to 10,000 extra residents over others. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pelosa. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Hillier, go ahead.
Thank you for receiving me today. Listening to Councillor Pelosa speak, and it was funny. I just cleaned my farm boots from the back of my car. All those of us from rural areas understand. Well, I'm going to talk about a couple things today. First of all, my ward. Yes, my ward has gone down, but let's be realistic. We're just getting a school that we've been waiting for 16 years for. Councillor Lewis is just getting a community center. This end of the city is just on the cusp of starting to take off. And I'm very excited for the future. I'm hoping we can get a move on Commissioners and Bradley very, very soon, because those roads are becoming a pinch point. And regarding ward boundaries, yes to 10 wards. I agreed with it a long time ago, and I agree with it now. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Lewis, I see your hand.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for recognizing me as a guest at committee today. First of all, I think it's good to look at both of these options. I think when we can redistribute the population more fairly across all wards, that's just a good democratic principle, as Councillor Morgan addressed. I'm wondering through you if staff could comment. I don't think it would be through the ward boundary process, but I would be looking to hear from our staff in terms of what process, and I think there might be a separate one running anyway, but what process would be appropriate to look at. The issue, for example, has been raised, Councillor Pelosa articulated it really well, people having to reach so many more households in some wards. What would be the process for looking at our council expenses in terms of how we could perhaps prorate those above the base to assist those with larger wards? I asked that for those because I'm actually on the lower end of the scale, so it certainly wouldn't change likely my expense account, but how would we look at taking a look at the ability to reach constituents through that process as well?
Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We will be commencing before the fall the council compensation review that we undertake always the year before the election years. So you'll be seeing a report and starting that process shortly.
Councillor Lewis.
Great, thank you. That's really my only question. I'm interested in the discussion here, and thanks for letting me speak, Madam Chair.
No problem. Okay. Any other comments or questions? I don't want to move on yet because I know Councillor Kayabaga wants to comment, but unfortunately her computer just restarted. I do have some comments, but I will wait to see if there are any other comments from committee or visiting councillors. Councillor Pelosa.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just for complete clarity through you to the city clerk, that we mentioned councillor compensation, but that the potential ward per resident engagement over and above, as Councillor Lewis had followed up with a question as well, if that would be part of it, or if they would need specific direction to look at that aspect as well.
Through Madam Chair, it is part of that process, and we also, in addition, have an outstanding direction from council to take a look at the expense policy as well. So we would incorporate that all through that compensation. But generally, the council compensation task force also looks at your expense policy as part of the compensation.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any other comments? I'll make a few. So as Councillor Pelosa, I think, pointed out, there is a balance there between expenses per ward, because a larger ward like mine is quite compact. So for a suburban ward, I think my density is quite high. And so while there are more constituents that I have to reach out to when I'm doing it physically, for example, for people that are running in Ward 5, the houses are closer together. There's lots of apartments, things like that. So that makes it a little bit easier. And then for somebody in a more rural ward, they have further to travel. So they have fewer voters to reach physically, but the distance between each voter is greater. So there is a little bit of that balance there. I'm absolutely supportive of making a more equitable distribution and not necessarily following an arbitrary rule of 25%. And I really appreciate the deputy mayor explaining it the way he has, as in the weight of each vote, for example, each voter that is represented by each ward councillor. That's a very compelling argument. I'm not going to say I told you so to the deputy mayor, because I was one of, I think, only 3 that voted to look at the number of wards that we have. And there were definitely arguments against why it wasn't the right time to do that at the time, but I've always been in favor of looking at this. It doesn't necessarily mean we're going to go that way. It doesn't necessarily, you know, we haven't seen all of the rationale for or against reducing the number of wards in the city. But when I look at other cities that are quite a bit larger than London and they have smaller council sizes, that resonates with me. And our number 1 job as a city councillor is policy, is making policy in the city of London. And that isn't necessarily affected by the number of constituents that we represent. The policy is important regardless of whether I represent 25,000 constituents or 35,000 constituents. And I would say as well that Ward 5, there are quite a few developments taking place right now. There are quite a few developments that have been approved that have not begun yet. And there are quite a few developments that began and the planning application process, but then stalled. And that one alone at the Masonville Mall site would have been over 1,000 dwelling units on that site alone. So Ward 5 is growing. It's a place where people want to be because it does offer so much as far as jobs, transit, residential units, lovely area of the city, as most of our areas of the city are, all of those things. So Ward 5 is growing. I also did inherit a small triangle from Ward 7 in time for the 2018 election. So I'm interested in looking at this. I think we can always look to do better. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to do this, but I'm in favor of information. So with that, I will go to Councillor Kayabaga.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for waiting for me as my computer decided to refresh in the middle of the meeting. I had a question through you, Madam Chair, to the mover of the motion. Just trying to understand Part A of the motion, which directs civic administration to review a model against the current 14 ward system. I'm curious to understand that a little bit, just because from the comments I've heard from my colleagues is that everyone has a concern that their ward boundaries have grown and their constituents numbers have grown, and that they're servicing a lot more people, but yet we're like, what does that mean looking at the 14 ward system against the current 14 ward system boundary? I just want to understand that before I vote or make an opinion on it.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Morgan, go ahead.
Yeah, great question, and I'm happy to answer it. So I'll answer the 2 parts. One is, in all of this, certainly I am referring to the relative size of the wards, not the absolute size of the wards. I honestly think that the size of the ward at the end of the day can be dealt with through, properly supporting councillors in the work that they're doing. The Democratic issue is really the relativity between the wards. Why did I suggest that we look at a 10? And really what this motion does is say, bring us back both. We're not making a decision yet. And we can decide on which one to go with, and we can have all of that important debate. 10 has come up before several times in this council, and that's where I get the "I told you so" from the chair. And I know former Deputy Mayor Hubert is going to call me tonight and say "I told you so." The number 10 has come up a number of times as a model that might work across the city, and I thought if we're going to contemplate going to 10. We actually have to get some information back to do that. And if we're going to do that, this is really our only opportunity to do so with the structures of the wards. So I do think there are lots of things we need to discuss and debate related to that, obviously. But the first step is getting back the actual divisions of the boundaries, and then we can move forward.
Councillor Kayabaga?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you again. I'm trying to I'm having a hard time grasping my mind around the 10 system, maybe because I'm not seeing it. I don't have the information to kind of make, and I know it's going to come and we're going to have that discussion, but I'm with the information from my colleagues who are talking about having higher numbers of people they have to serve. And as the downtown councilor, knowing how many and how diverse my ward is and how many constituents we have to serve and how much the engagement and the growth of our population has happened and the work that we have to do, I would be cautious that reducing the wards would probably bring more work to counselors with less resources to be able to actually serve the community. So I'm trying to understand why, if 14 is already challenging as is, 10 wouldn't be double the work and more challenging to be able to serve the entire community. But understanding that this is something that's been, I was not part of the conversation before when this came over. But if we're trying to see if 10 would be something that would consider, is there room in this motion to add perhaps what it actually would also look like if we increased and we reduced and then keeping it as is, so that we have different options to look at and to make that decision informed? Because I'm knowing how much work I do already, having a larger boundary would be very challenging, and the resources are not there to support us to do that. So I'm just curious to know why this is a favored decision, and if we could explore all three options instead of just the two options.
I'm going to go back to the deputy mayor for that, and then if Councillor Kaibog is finished, when she's finished, I'll go to the mayor.
Yes, another excellent point by the councillor. So what I would say is the report we got before us was what should the ward boundaries of the city be? And I'm trying to address that in a direct way. But what the clerk also said today, and I'm not sure if you were on the call at the time because I know you dropped off, is we're also going to be conducting a compensation review this year. I believe the last council out of the last compensation report said we should do it this year in time for the next term of council. And it was confirmed through a question that Councillor Lewis asked the clerk that would include, or maybe it was Councillor Pelosa, I'll just give them both credit. It will include, a review potentially of the support mechanisms. So whereas you may serve maybe a slightly larger boundary, maybe you get more dedicated staff support, or the compensation could change out of that to allow you to do your job as effectively as possible. That could be contained within that review. And my anticipation is if council says, let's look at a couple of different ward models on the boundary side, it would be incumbent of us to also look at those sorts of models and how to properly support them on the compensation review side of things. And I see the clerk nodding. So I think all of your concerns can be captured in the discussion because it's already there on compensation, supports, how to best support councillors with resources to do their job in both of those contemplated systems.
Councillor Kaibaga?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Deputy Mayor Morgan. I just wondered if you're able to take in also that point of having the three options for review for all of us so that we can make a best informed decision.
So I'm understanding what you want the deputy mayor to consider is not just staying at 14 or going to 10, but also a third option of increasing the number of wards?
Correct, Madam Chair.
The deputy mayor is thinking.
I think I mean, you could certainly move it as an amendment. It's the first time I've heard anybody interested in more wards. I would say you could certainly, like we're asking for options for the clerk, you could ask for an amendment to add that particular piece in and the committee could debate it. I'm not sure how others feel about it, but now I understand what you're asking. It's the first time I've heard someone suggest more wards, which is a perfectly legitimate thing to suggest, but maybe we could deal with that through an amendment process to see what others think about it.
So before, Madam Chair, we add that into an amendment, I just want kind of explain why I think having those three options to look at would be best, because as I mentioned, I heard from my colleagues talk about the difficulties that they face or the higher numbers of people that they have to serve. And we can also look at the ways that we engage with the community and the ways that participation happens across the city. There's a lot of people who don't get the chance to actually participate in a lot of the work that we do, perhaps because of the lack of resources that we don't have to be able to reach out to every single person that we represent. And also even it shows in votership. So I'm just wondering if for people who may not have a specific opinion, like I don't have, this is the first time I'm dealing with this ward boundary review. So I would like to have a holistic plan to be able to make that decision, to see this is where we are. This is what it would look like if we were decreasing the ward boundaries. So I'm sure people who have had this discussion in the past have a lot more information than we do, or, you know, than I do. I just want to be able to have and to make an informed decision, knowing what it would look like if we stayed the same, what it would look like if we reduce or had to increase. That way, my decision is going to actually be informed based on what we already know and what we don't know. So I feel like I'm clueless with this ward boundary decisions, and I want to have an opinion, and I don't have one because I don't have the full picture of what everything could look like. So I just know what I already know as a city councilor who's serving in this moment with this ward boundary that I have right now. So it's really just for information, not just for me, but for other people who, for the community as well, as we change the ward boundaries for them.
So are you interested in making an amendment to this motion that's on the floor, Councillor?
I will if the deputy mayor is not interested in entertaining after my explanation as to why I would like to add that.
So I think the deputy mayor would like to keep his motion the way it is, but he looks like yes. So he doesn't view this as a friendly amendment. He wants to keep his motion the way it is. Okay. He wants to make a comment on this question.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly respect the councillor's opinion. The reason why I thought I suggest we could do the amendment process is if you go back further in the history of this, there was actually a referendum that was approved by the citizens of London to reduce the size of council. So if we were contemplating increasing it, I think there would certainly be, you know, some people who might have some strong opinions on that. So I think, you know, if we did it as an amendment process, people could express their thoughts on that and decide whether or not to add it in. There's even more history on the larger council related to some referendums that we've had.
So if you're interested in an amendment to also look at a larger council with more wards, I would look first to see if there's anybody on the committee that would be willing to second that amendment.
Before I do that, Madam Chair, I just want to clarify that I do not want to explore increasing the ward boundaries. I just want to have the information of what that would look like, just because I don't know what that would look like. I want to make sure that I can have an opinion with all the information, and I don't have an opinion right now just because I don't have the full picture of everything. Yes, I know that I read the referendum that people had voted to reduce, but as we were talking about right now, the challenges that we face even in this moment as the board boundaries are at 14 and not 10, I just want to make sure that I have an opinion that is informed, and I don't have one right now.
So you would like a report, any report that comes back to also include information on if we,
and not because we're trying to increase the ward boundaries, just to get a picture of what that would look like.
Right. So is there a seconder willing to second this amendment? And I don't see a seconder, Councillor. So I'm going to move to the mayor now.
Thanks very much. And this may touch on Councillor Kiabaga's concerns as well, because I do appreciate what she is saying. And I think the challenges for councillors in terms of trying to be able to service constituents is difficult, irrespective of the number. You went from the smallest to the largest wards. And I do have great empathy for that. I think what becomes the potential of a separate discussion, and this may well get to the heart of the councillors' concerns, is that what are the supports that we're providing colleagues to be able to do their job? And that might well be one of the key pieces that may come as a result of the review that the clerk provides us as we go down the decision-making trail. So I do believe this has a lot more to do with additional resources and supports at some point, and that might just be a necessary reality. So with all of that, my feeling is that her concerns are well expressed. And I do believe that as we develop our thinking around this, we may find that there are some additional resource opportunities to support it. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Are there any other comments or questions on this issue? Okay, we have a motion on the floor. It's been moved by the deputy mayor. It's been seconded by the mayor. And I'll call the vote on that.
Councillor Kaibon. Closing the vote, the motion carries 6.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So that takes us to items for direction. There are no scheduled items. 4.1 is an application for an issuance of a proclamation of Sikh Heritage Month. I believe this is a group that we issued a proclamation for last year as well. Can I vote? Is that moved by Councillor Kabaga and seconded by Councillor Van Holst? Any comments or questions on this item? Great. Okay, I'll call the vote on that.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
There are no deferred matters or additional business on the confidential agenda. They are listed on the public agenda for people who would like to see what we are going into in camera for, but I do need a motion to go in camera. Moved by Councillor Pelosa and seconded by Councillor Van Holst. I'll call the vote on that.
Closing the vote and the motion carries